with my colleagues and with some of our constituents to introduce two bills that together make up the Local Wage Act. The Local Wage Act consists of two different bills that return the ability to our local governments to set local wage floors and to set basic leave standards for our cities, villages, towns, and counties. This really takes what right now is only in the state's hand, and we do not allow our cities, our towns, our villages to do this, and it restores that power to them. Across the state, Wisconsin families are living paycheck to paycheck, and they're struggling to make ends meet. Currently, 1 in 4 Wisconsinites works a job that pays poverty-level wages. 1 in 4 Wisconsinites is working. 1 in 4 working Wisconsinites is still living below that poverty line because their job pays poverty-level wages. Wisconsin's minimum wage of $7.25 an hour is not tied to inflation, and it has not increased in nearly a decade. The last increase to Wisconsin's minimum wage was in 2009. Likewise, families across the state are struggling to get by without paid leave and even risk losing their jobs when they need to take time off to care for themselves or for a loved one who is sick. I'd like to share with you a story of a family that I encountered when I worked in the homeless shelter system. The family had just come in. It was a mother with a couple of children, and she came into the shelter, and I was doing her intake, and I said to her, "Why are you homeless?" And she said to me, "Chicken pox." And I said, "You're homeless because of chicken pox?" And she said, "Yes. When her kids got chicken pox, she had to take time off from work. That she didn't get paid for that time off. That set her behind in her bills. When her second child got chicken pox, she actually was told if she took another day off, she was going to lose her job. She lost her job, and that set forth many months of homelessness ahead for her and her children." And her story's not that unusual. I heard similar stories all of the time. I can remember a couple who both worked in healthcare at a hospital. One in food service at the hospital, the other in client services, who had to take time off for a sick family member, and one of them lost their job as a result. And again, these stories are not isolated. It happens all over the state. I not only heard those stories every day when I worked in the shelter system, but I hear them from my constituents. I hear from people all the time, whether in my office or at hearings like the one I was in earlier regarding public benefits, that Wisconsinites are struggling. They don't have what they need to make ends meet, and our families are in jeopardy as a result. Low wages and lack of unpaid leave are two of the biggest problems facing Wisconsin families. As you can see on the chart here to my left, the cost of living is high in Wisconsin, and it varies greatly from community to community. If you look at the chart, you see in Superior, a parent with one child needs to make $18.26 to make ends meet. You can compare that to $16 just a little bit to the south in certain areas of northern rural Wisconsin. When you start looking at the differences for larger families, it's even greater. That is why today we are here introducing the Local Wage Act. Not only have Republicans failed to address the need for paid leave, and not only have Republicans failed to act in nearly a decade to raise wages, but also there are clear differences from community to community in what it costs to rent an apartment, to buy food, and to meet other basic needs. And for too many hardworking Wisconsin families, those basic living needs are out of reach. No one who works hard should have to be poor, nor should any working person have to choose between their health or the health of a loved one and their job. In the hands of Republicans, state government has failed our citizens by not raising wages and not addressing the issue of paid leave. It is time that we restore the ability of our local governments and our local elected officials to set wage floors that actually reflect the cost of living in their communities, and to address the challenges faced by workers who need to take a little bit of time off when they are sick or when their child is ill. Next, I'd like to introduce to you Sierra Fox.
I think she wants to bring up a mic.
Oh, come on up. You're fine. Come on up. You want me to repeat all that? No, just kidding. Let me go back. No one should have to be poor. No working person should have to be poor. I'll say it again and again. So now I'd like to introduce Sierra Fox. Sierra is a certified nursing assistant, and she would like to share with you her experiences trying to make ends meet as a low-wage worker. Sierra?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for introducing that video. Everything you just talked about is actually describing my life at the current moment. I'm going to try not to get emotional because everything that you just said is describing my life at this current moment. I wrote it down. I'm going to try to stay on topic. But it's definitely a reality. I have a child with hydrocephalus, and she was sick. She was hospitalized for 4 weeks, and I lost my job. And it set me behind January's rent and February's rent. I just worked last week one day for, I'm very humble. I had to humble myself to work for what I worked for, just to have gas so I could work the following weekend, a double shift, so I can be able to pay my car note. Rent is not an option right now because that's too much far gone. So I have to rely on public assistance, which they gave me $660 to pay a portion of my rent. So I'll be working midnights all this week to make $500 to put that towards a balance of $1,586 for my rent for 2 months. Having a sick child just put me all the way behind. But working for a temp agency at a nursing home, I don't have those benefits of sick leave, vacation, which I really needed the sick leave because my daughter was on her deathbed. But thank God and thank the doctors at Children's Memorial for coming through. Definitely a great hospital and excellent neurosurgeons. Let me rewind. Hi, my name is Sierra Fox, and I'm here today in support of raising the wages. I believe that everyone, Black, white, Latino, men and women, should make a wage that's sufficient enough to take care of their family. I am a single mother of 4, and I am struggling to maintain my household, not because I don't work, but because the wages are so low. As I stated a few moments ago, I had to humble myself to work for less than my worth, just to put gas in my car so I could work the following weekend, a double shift. I'm so humble at this point in my life. I applied for public assistance, which they granted me a certain amount to put towards my rent. I also applied for food share, so I don't have to worry about feeding my kids because that was a concern of mine. I'm not sure if these employers or lawmakers or even Governor Walker himself understands the struggle of working for a low wage. I'm a CNA, have been certified for 17 years, and I'm very proud of it. I care for the elderly, the disabled, individuals needing rehab. I assist them with all their daily personal hygiene needs. I also feed them, toilet them, bathe them, shower them, walk them, things that they can no longer do themselves. But it doesn't end there. I'm their friend, their daughter, their sister, when those individuals are not available. Long hours, short staff, constantly walking, heavy lifting, on top of low wages. I do this job because it's in my heart, but also I know one day I'm going to get old and I'm going to need someone to take care of me. And I want them to care for me with the same heart that I have caring for someone else's mother, grandmother, grandfather, dad. I know the care that I provide as a CNA is much more than what I worked for this following week and what many other CNAs work for every day. These wages we cannot survive off of. The wages have to be increased. So many people seek public assistance because they are not making enough, working 40 hours a week, and you cannot put food on your table, and you have to struggle to pay We Energy because they report to the credit bureau. And who wants their credit messed up on top of bills, on top of bills? It is a serious issue. The wages must go up. And I'm going to continue to support any lawmaker, even if it was a Republican, trying to raise the wages, which I know that's not going to happen. But, hey, we need to wake up. People are not surviving. People are existing. They're not living. Vacations are not possible. You know, it's a lot. But I just want to thank you guys for listening to me. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'm going to introduce Senator Hanson.
Thank you, Sierra.
Thank you.
I can relate to that. My 4 grandkids have been sick with the flu, and that's just not even a week. It's a couple weeks, so it's a real challenging time. They really do get sick, and we've lost so many in our country to this flu, young people. 27 states have a higher minimum wage than Wisconsin, and this includes such bastions of liberalism, I'm being facetious, as Alaska, Missouri, and West Virginia. 39 states and municipalities increased the minimum wage on or around New Year's Day. 11 more plan to raise the minimum wage later this year. In all, at least 50 places, many of which include cities and smaller communities, will raise the minimum wage sometime this year because it is absolutely essential for the survival of a lot of people. Wisconsin, on the other hand, hasn't increased their minimum wage since actually 2009, and Governor Walker and Republicans, and when they took control of state government, it hasn't even been discussed. Governor Walker and Republicans have no problem forcing each and every one of us to take $500, I say $500 out of our wallet and give it to Chinese-based Foxconn. But they have no interest at all in making sure employers in the state pay a fair wage for an honest day's work. So again, a fair wage for an honest day's work. In fact, they are so set on keeping wages down, they've been willing to lower standards for every kind of work, from who can teach your kids to who provides nursing care for your parents or grandparents. They're even gone so far as to prohibiting local communities from setting their own living wage based upon their own values and cost of living. But to do so ignores reality for over 100,000 workers and their families for all around the state who are working hard but stuck in poverty or near poverty level wages because their wages are not keeping up with the cost of living in their communities. Rent or housing costs are higher in Madison than they are in Marshfield. The price of gas, heating oil, and groceries might be higher in Rhinelander than Racine. Because of these differences in the cost of living, it only makes sense that local communities should have the right to establish their own community values, including how they believe the value of work should be treated. The party of local control used to be the Republican Party. No more. No one should work for poverty-level wages, not in Madison, not in Marshfield, not in Green Bay, where I come from, not in Green Lake, not in Milwaukee, and not in Mellon. And the politicians in Madison shouldn't force them to. It is time to give back the right of communities, local control, to set their own standards when it comes to how they value work and the people who do it. Now I'd like to introduce Peter Rickman, who is president of the Alliance for Good Jobs. Thank you.
Thanks. Before I say what I have to say, I just want to extend a heartfelt thanks to Representative Subek, Senator Hanson, Senator Johnson, who is a sponsor of one of the other parts of the Local Wage Act. I'm here to share a little bit of a narrative, a little bit of economics. Now, our country built the world's first middle class when workers organized and policymakers responded to their demands in the streets and in the workplaces to create the basic foundations of what raised wages, income, and living standards in America. And for the middle part of the 20th century, we expanded access to the middle class. Workers organized unions that bargained with their employers because policies reflected that need, and they set wage floors through things like the minimum wage and prevailing wage laws. That combined to enhance the bargaining power of workers in labor markets. We built the world's first middle class, we continued to expand it, and then that started to change. And I'm going to get to where we got to now and run through some of the basic numbers. But too often we just sort of walk away from the explanatory tale of, in fact, how we got to this point where the share of our income and wealth created in this country has now never been more lopsided than what it is today. Bargaining power for working people was diminished because wage floors didn't continue to adapt with the realities of our economy. And the big shift in our economy was away from this massive scale of industrial production employment that tended to be high wage and high union density towards now predominantly lower wage, mostly non-union service sector jobs. That shift and the erosion of bargaining power because policies didn't keep up has meant that our reality today for working people is such that in a full employment economy, for the first time in American history, for the first time in the history of this United States, in the richest country in the world, a full employment economy is not delivering the substantial wage gains that working people need. Median wages have been stagnant. And at the bottom end of the labor market, which is now growing, they're declining. Living standards have been stagnant and actually only remain flat simply because debt-fueled consumption, because folks are relying upon debt to pay for education and health care. That's not a sustainable life for the middle class, and that's why it continues to erode and collapse. Household income has only remained flat simply because we've converted virtually every household to a two-earner household. That is something laudable, that we have more equity in the workplace, although a long ways to go. But the fact that that's the only reason that household income has remained at the level it has tells us that wages are too low. Wages are too low. Living standards remain too low, and it's because bargaining power is too low, because policies have not strengthened and enhanced the bargaining power of working people. So I want to just close out here with my remarks on saying what we ought to be doing. And this chart actually shows us a great deal because it reflects labor market realities. We don't have statewide labor markets. We have regional labor markets. They're inherently defined by the sectors that are involved. The share of employment in hospitality or food service, the share of employment in industrial production or customer service and retail jobs. Our employment situation in the economy in this state and nationally and globally has changed dramatically from when we first built the middle class here. So it's time for our policies to adapt to what our reality is today. That's just good policy making, that's good government, and that's reflecting the needs of working people as much as it is reflecting, as Senator Hansen said, the way we value work. So if we're going to raise wages, we're going to enhance bargaining power of working people in their sector, in their industry, it's going to be because we devolve control over wage standards to local governments. Here today, it's actually an auspicious anniversary. It's been 4 years since Milwaukee County adopted a living wage ordinance that is on a path to 15. That affected a few thousand, maybe about 10,000 working people. Imagine if the whole of Milwaukee County was now on a path to a living wage. And that living wage was also the path for workers in Marathon County as well, or in my hometown of Neenah, in Winnebago County. Just imagine if we gave local communities the ability to set their wage floors in accordance with what their labor markets are. That's good policy making for employers and for workers in our economy as a whole. We're stuck with a one-size-fits-all approach, but the problem is it doesn't fit anyone right now. So we're here today to talk about this bill, but also to call for action, to call for a hearing on this bill, and to call for its adoption by the folks in this legislature and our governor, because it's time to raise the wage for working people and make it a living wage for where we live. So thank you all for coming here today. I'll open it up to questions and sort of play a little bit of traffic cop and get the right person up to answer the question.
Have you guys talked to local cities in the area to see if they would be interested in doing something like this?
Sir, obviously, until this is enacted, local government couldn't do it. But certainly we have heard from a number of local elected officials over the last several years about their frustration with not having the ability to do this. So there's no specific proposal on the table, and certainly there wouldn't be unless we enabled them to create one. But there is interest among local government. I think we've heard it even in testimony on hearings. The Republicans have been down this track of taking away the ability of local elected officials to make all sorts of decisions, particularly as they relate to the plight of workers in their communities. And as we've had hearings on various bills that take the next step and the next step, we have heard again and again from local elected officials, we want to be able to make those determinations. In some cases, they might move to to pass a sick leave ordinance or to increase wages. In other cases, they might not, but they know their communities far better than any one of us does.
And I think it says it all when we're talking about conservative states moving their minimum wage up. It does not hurt what goes on in those states. Washington State and all these others that have increased it by a larger amount. But we got to start somewhere. We should have the ability of local government to be able to raise the minimum wage. And I'm not saying necessarily $15 right away. Milwaukee working on getting up to that. But it's time. People are not making enough money to survive. And to think back in 2009, $7.25 an hour, and then today, it's ridiculous. It's time to move ahead.
I'd just like to add one thing to that. I think we've seen a nationwide trend of municipalities that do have this power exercising it to raise wages. And Senator Hansen referenced Washington State, where the state level minimum wage has continued to go up. But Seattle went further for a variety of reasons. Some fascinating research was put out yesterday. There's a piece in the Washington Post. I definitely recommend you check it out. A noted scholar studying employment effects on raising wages, Andrejat Dubé, said basically, when wages go up in local communities, the effect is that wages go up, period. There was nothing there about, employment goes down, etc. He did a comprehensive study of about 140 communities saying wages go up when local communities adopt wage standards of their own. So I think we can look to the example of these roughly 140 places that have been studied saying they've raised their wage. They haven't gotten rid of their wage increases. It's pretty likely to say that here in Wisconsin, if we enabled, say, Milwaukee and Madison or Neenah and Eau Claire and La Crosse to do this, they'd have that authority exercised fairly quickly. But right now, they don't. Let's give folks the chance to study this and figure out what works in their community. Other questions?
I don't know what to. I was going to say Republicans have sort of a different approach to medical leave that they talked about this week, and I was wondering why you think maybe that they don't have the right approach, or whether or not what you think about it. Republicans have been in control of the legislature for almost 8 years now and have not moved once on this issue. I mean, I think that speaks for itself. Democrats have offered bills, actually, that would put in place a family medical leave plan that would enable folks to take paid leave through an insurance-type setup, would not cost employers. It would actually be done through folks putting in money through their wages. Yet Republicans have failed to even hold a hearing on that. So while this week, as we're heading into election season, we see Republicans suddenly flip-flopping, and certainly we saw the governor do a lot of this in his State of the State, Republicans are flip-flopping on some of these critical issues going into election season. I think what we are seeing is candidates versus elected officials, and when they come back here and they govern, they fail again and again and again to enact the very policies that they're talking about.
When it comes to FMLA, there's those two Republican bills that want to make it more streamlined to the federal law. They argue that employers are confused. Why do you think giving more local control would make it better when they say it's already confusing enough?
I'd rather see the feds adopt what we have in the state and then go further. That said, the fact that some Republican legislators say it's confusing doesn't make it so. Certainly, I have not heard from a single business owner in my district, and I have lots of large and small businesses. I mean, I have businesses like, I have national chains and I have local businesses in my district, as do most of us. I have not heard once from a business owner in my district that FMLA was just too complicated.
And there's a lot of fast food restaurants in this state where you're working for $7, $8, $9, $10 an hour with no family medical leave and no vacation and no personal time. And when your kid gets sick, that's what happened to you. We're talking about people that go bankrupt or they lose their house. They can't afford to do anything. We've got to do something that's going to make it better. And that includes increasing wages and having some form of family medical leave because it will make sense. It depends where you work. Some people have it pretty good, but there are a lot of people out there that are really, really struggling.
Anything else?
How do you plan to get support for this with the GOP legislature?
You want to take that? You want me?
It might take till November of 2018 where people can see that we can make a difference for all. And we're not seeing that from this legislature. We're hoping they'll jump on board. The governor has flipped on a lot of issues, but maybe that's what it's going to take. Have a different philosophy in how we're going to take care of the people on the lower end.
Is this something that you guys have talked about before? I mean, giving local control for minimum wage?
Forever. Forever. At one point, there was local control, both for minimum wage and for sick leave policies. And so I think ever since the time that those were reversed, at least some of us have been talking about that. It's certainly something that's talked about regularly within, the meetings that we have with local elected officials as well.
I'd like to just add a historical note here. Forgive me if I drone a little on some of the background, but Wisconsin adopted one of the first minimum wage laws in the history of the United States at the state level back in the 19-teens. And, that was on the books for literally decades with local control in place. At the time, though, labor markets weren't structured on the local level. They were largely national. And, our economy has changed. It's time for policy making to reflect the nature of employment and the economy. Unfortunately, what happened in the mid-2000s is that local control was taken away just at the time we needed to have a policy measure in place that allowed wages to be set on the regional level. We built a middle class on jobs that employ people as steel workers and auto workers, machinists and paper makers, and that's a proud tradition in our state. Now, those jobs are, changed pretty dramatically. Those folks our working class is now employed as a CNA, as a housekeeper in a hotel or a hospital, as a janitor in a commercial office building, in food service, retail, customer service. If we don't have policy making that matches the reality, we're not going to actually address the needs that people have. So I think folks have talked about raising wages in a variety of ways over preceding generations. The question here today in front of us is, what is this body in the legislature and in the governor's office going to do to make policy that allows us to address the wage raising needs that fit with our labor markets and our economy today? Bringing control to local government means putting the power and authority in the hands of folks who know best what's going on at the level of labor markets. So this is just the extension of a conversation that has happened for decades in Wisconsin. We haven't needed local control quite the way that we do now. So if we're going to get serious about raising wages, building bargaining power for workers, and rebuilding the middle class, it's going to start with putting power to raise wages in the hands of folks who know local labor markets the best. That's local government. So are there any other closing comments here? I think you should take it home.
All right. Any final questions? Well, thank you all for being here, and certainly if questions come up, feel free to contact us.
Thanks.
We'll be available to you. Go to your committee hearing. Thank